You're listening to TFM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there.
Hey everyone, I'm Rod Roddenberry, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Are you taking all these books? I thought I'd take some light reading. Guess I got bored.
Well, hello and welcome to Literary Treks, our dedicated books and comic show for Star Trek here on the TFM network. And I'm just one of the hosts, Matthew Rushing. I'm so excited to have with me, as he is every single time, the one and only Casey Pettitt. And how are you doing, Casey?
I am doing great. We are finally in summer. We're about to have a nice 3-day weekend in the U.S. for Memorial Day. It's very nice to be out of winter.
Yes, I could not agree more. I'm very excited about this long weekend coming up. In fact, I took off Friday so I can have an extra long weekend. So I'm very excited about that. But I'm also excited to dive into everything that we've got here for you on this episode of Literary Treks. There's so much to talk about. But before we get into that, I definitely wanted to remind you, subscribe wherever you're getting your podcasts, and that way you'll get Literary Treks as soon as the episodes drop. You can also, of course, make sure that you give us a star rating and a review on a place like Apple Podcasts, or Spotify takes star ratings, so those things really help the show grow. We would also appreciate it if you'd go over and follow us on social media like Twitter or Instagram. You can find at Trek FM. You can also find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Trek FM. Got the listeners only discussion group on Facebook called the Babel Conference, and you can join listeners from all over the world talking about the different shows here, and we'd love to have you interact in there. And of course, we've got the website, Trek.fm. You can check out, see all the shows that we're doing. And last but not least, we would appreciate it if, like Casey Pettitt or Greg Rosier, you would become a patron of us on Patreon. So you can go over to patreon.com/TrekFM and become part of our team. Really a huge thank you to Casey as well as Greg for being associate producers of Literary Treks. They like the show here, and that's one of the perks that they've done, is to become an associate producer here of this show. Patreon is the best way to make sure that all of the podcasts that we do here on Trek FM can keep coming to you each and every week. Casey knows it's a lot of work, and now when you're behind the scenes to put these podcasts on, it also costs a lot of money. And so go to patreon.com/TrekFM and become part of the team. So, Casey, our news segment is actually huge this week because we have so much to talk about. But one is just a big congratulations to Star Trek Comics.
Yeah, this is pretty cool. They've gotten nominated for the 2023 Eisner Awards. They've been nominated for 2, the best single issue or one shot for Star Trek number 400, and then also the best new series for the Star Trek ongoing series, which we are going through right now. And, I think as you've heard on the show before, we've enjoyed those issues, and we've enjoyed the Star Trek series that's been going on. So that's a pretty big deal. And so, look forward to seeing the results of this. And big congrats to Star Trek Comics.
Absolutely. I mean, this really is a huge deal, and a huge congratulations to them. And I think well-deserved. I honestly think that the Star Trek series has been phenomenal so far. And the cool thing is we're actually going to talk about 2 of them tonight because we have so many comics to review. So Casey, why don't we celebrate these comics by diving into some comic reviews, which we have Dog of War number 2 here. And oh my goodness, Casey, When this was first announced, I thought, well, this just sounds ridiculous. And this may have turned into one of my favorite comic series that we're going through right now, which says a lot because we've been enjoying them so much. But this issue builds off the first issue so well, and just, I really do feel as though I am reading and, a comic, which is wonderfully visual, an episode that was lost from, like, say, the 5th season.
Yeah, like you said, I was skeptical of this one too. The Dog of War. We've got a dog on the covers of these, but that is just a fun little aspect of this. And like you said, it's like watching an episode, and we don't get new episodes of Deep Space Nine anymore. So having these stories that take place during the series is really cool. And yeah, the visuals of this are great. The story is compelling. And, even the dog that's in it, we're starting to kind of get a little bit attached to, as are some of the characters. So, this is, I feel like it was a little bit of a risk for, IDW to be putting something like this out, but it is very successful, in my opinion.
I think that one of the things that, to me, has made it the most successful at this point has been the fact that not only does it feel like a lost, episode, but the voices of the characters is perfect, but also the story of allowing Sisko to have his moment to face the Borg here, as we've given Picard many times now. And I feel like this had been a missed opportunity. And the way that they're doing this with this Borg technology and the power that it could offer the Federation and its allies against the Dominion, and yet the slippery slope that it is phenomenal, I think. And I'm so excited to kind of see where this story goes, because with that side of it, we're dealing with kind of the darker underpinnings of Deep Space Nine, in the sense of, what are we willing to do to survive, and what, morals or any of those type of things might we put on the shelf during wartime. And so I really appreciate the way in which that this has not only been so congruous with the series, but it's just been a great story that I just didn't expect when they first announced this series. And I think they played up the whole dog aspect so much. But really, like you said, that's really only a minor part of the story, really. And it's used more as a framing device to help us tell this other very interesting, and I would say very important story for specifically Sisko here. So I'm loving this. I could not give this higher marks 2 issues in.
Couldn't agree with you more.
Which leads me to this second comic that we're going to talk about tonight, which is the motion picture Echoes #1. This is set right after Star Trek: The Motion Picture, and it's kind of billed almost like as the next adventure that happens to the Enterprise. And what did you think of this one?
I had no expectations going into this except just knowing we're getting a motion picture era story. And so I was pleasantly surprised actually by it. Like, the artwork in this one is amazing. We get to see the Enterprise refit in all her glory. And then, it's really just a good setup story for whatever's coming next in this little mini series that we've got. I'm not sure that we really want to totally spoil who shows up, but it's just a fun story. It involves all of the characters that we know from the motion picture, and I think it's on its way to setting up a pretty good story going forward. What do you think of this one?
I think you're right on target with everything that you said there. I would say, for me, with the artwork specifically, there are some shots here that are just incredibly beautiful. And then I would say that there are some others that I think the likenesses, they're definitely taking some artistic license with that. The Enterprise herself looks beautiful, although I will say there is, an issue that I do have with the issue, which is there's the top of the saucer in one of the shots, and it doesn't have the registry number or name on it, which I thought was kind of strange because it's pretty prominent there, and it's just blank, which it looks weird. But otherwise...
It's funny, I didn't even notice that the first time.
I'm always looking, especially when it's the Refit Enterprise or the Enterprise A, because those are my favorite versions of the Enterprise. I'm very, very cognizant of what's going on with the look and the feel of that. So that's just me being super picky. But I think like you, this is a very interesting setup. And I think the thing that fascinated me the most here was the way in which, really dealing with Kirk wanting to stay on the Enterprise and being told by an admiral, okay, look, yes, you're right, you should deal with this, but this is the last time. When you're done with this, you're coming back to your job. And so I'm so interested to see where we go from there, because we do know that Kirk doesn't stay on the Enterprise forever because he does end up back in command. Now, I feel like in my brain, Kirk was given another 5-year mission at this point. But I think that might just be, Star Trek fan canon lore and not necessarily in stone that happened. And because I also felt like that was something that happened after Star Trek 4 into Star Trek 5, which was another. But again, that could just be fan lore. So I think this is a great start, and I don't want to spoil who shows up in this one, because I do think it will be better if people just read it. But I think this is a good start. I would say my expectations after this issue are slightly more tempered, just because I'm not quite sure. I think it's a decent setup, but I don't know exactly whether or not it'll become something that truly becomes a story that I'm really, really excited about, in the same way that some of the others have immediately captured my attention. So, but no, I think this is a good start, and I love this time period, so I'm just excited to be getting a story in this time period.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely... I feel like we've gone through some eras in the novels where we've gotten a lot of stories in the motion picture era just because it was so much overlooked. But, so even though we've gotten a lot of stories there, I feel like it's kind of just fun getting especially a comic one, getting the visuals of that time period, because you don't get that when you're reading a novel.
100%. No, I'm right there with you. And because, who doesn't love seeing them in their pajamas? So...
Exactly.
Well,
I love wearing pajamas to work.
So the next few issues we're going to review in order. So we're kind of talking about the story in order as it goes. But Star Trek 7, issue 7 is next. And goodness, this was a great issue, because I think it kind of gave both of us some of the things that we had mentioned earlier, especially for the Cisco story of getting to meet his daughter, spending time with Cassidy, talking about, just his life after the Celestial Temple and what he wants it to be, and especially what he wants it to be after all of this kerfuffle that's going on gets solved. And then I think it really just took me on a wild ride with, who we bring with us to Cardassia on the ship from a show I didn't expect to see in this series. And then the fact that we end with, Cisco being arrested to be put on trial for his quote unquote war crimes.
Yeah, that was the one thing, I love how this story goes, as, who shows up, and that was totally unexpected, and I couldn't have been happier by the choice there. I feel like the character that they brought on was the perfect choice for this mission, and just another way to kind of bring all of the shows, all the series together. ending with the kind of leading into the trial of Benjamin Sisko, I feel like we've had so many comics over the years that have, I mean, I don't know how many trials of Captain James T. Kirk we had in the comic books. I feel like DC probably did one, Marvel did one, they're all over the place. And especially for this one, it was, and we'll get into it when we get into the issue 8, but, I was just a little concerned, I guess, where they were going, like, are we going to just do a trial just because, oh no, they're putting Sisko on trial, or is there going to be something that really comes out of this? Because I don't want to say it's a cop-out to do the trials, but I'm just a little hesitant going into it, because what can we really gain from a story out of that? But as far as leading into a trial, I feel like this issue was right up there with the rest of them. And, at the end of this one, I'm still, even though I'm not real sure about a trial, I'm ready to get into it.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that's really interesting here is that we learn that there are a bunch of different orbs that we haven't necessarily heard of before. And one of them is the Orb of Destruction, which is what Sisko is going to be looking for. That's one of the reasons they're going to Cardassia, because they believe that the Cardassians still have some of these orbs. And it was a really interesting thing, because we're really dealing with the idea of the prophets, and Kira, even this kind of worries her in kind of in almost some ways it feels like it shakes her faith a little bit with the prophets, of seeing them having created an orb of destruction, a weapon of mass destruction. And so I really love the way in which this series has taken full force this idea of these godlike beings in Star Trek and all of that. And, even the fact that Sisko's talking to Cassidy and saying, the prophets aren't infallible, they're not that kind of God, and so to me, that's just a really, all of these things are making for really fascinating conversations. And so I, like you though, I hope that this trial thing does not last too long. And we might talk about that in a minute, but we need to talk about the Day of Blood Prelude that came in the Free Comic Book Day issue. And this is really featuring our Day of Blood prelude, in the sense of like kind of setting us on the course for what's going on with the Klingons and what is leading this change in them, and really setting us on the path to see this new way of thinking for them and Kahless, and the idea of this the Red Path, which is I guess almost a new form of the Klingon religion surrounding Kahless, and this is definitely the way to get you interested, because it ramps up very quickly here, and it involves some characters we know like Kahless and Alexander, because we know Alexander has turned his back on his father and the ways of Klingons here. So just utterly fascinating to me how they're building this with the Klingons.
Yeah, and this is like you said, a prelude to Day of Blood, which is a 5-part crossover that's coming in a couple months here, starting in July 2023. And yeah, I agree. This was a fast-paced story, kind of introducing this idea, or kind of expanding on this idea of the Red Path and the Klingons that are ironically sort of worshiping Kahless as a god, even though Kahless was the god killer. And to see Alexander here, who we saw, I can't remember if it was in Star Trek or if it was in Defiant, but, we saw his kind of altercation with Worf and how he went over with Kahless, but I'd kind of forgotten about that aspect before reading this, so it was a little bit of a shock to me still when I saw Alexander show up. But yeah, the, IDW is kind of just hitting it out of the park with these comics and with the artwork and everything that's going on in these. And I think that this was a really neat issue, especially for Free Comic Book Day, to give out, to put this prelude in there, but also even just there was an excerpt from one of the Lower Decks comics. I think it was from the first Lower Decks comic issue. And, I'm hoping a lot of people have got the chance to pick that up and read it and start getting excited about the Star Trek comics if you're not already for some reason.
No, that's so well said, and I couldn't agree with you more. I think this is a great way to be able to get people interested in Star Trek comics, especially, with this big crossover coming, which we've never had something like this in Star Trek comics where they've done a big crossover, which leads us to the fact that we've got Defiant number 3, which is a part of this crossover with the Star Trek series that's going to be happening, as well as the Day of Blood issues that will be coming out. And so what did you think of this issue? Because, last time we left it, Worf and Ro and B'Elanna had been captured by Orions, and it was up to Spock and hopefully Lore to be able to save them. And I'm really interested to see what you thought of this issue.
This one was a pretty interesting one. It didn't really go in the way I thought it would, but it has this like underlying narration throughout it of kind of almost an Orion parable or something, of this leader that people turned against, I guess, and I think we're kind of we're basically seeing it play out with our Defiant crew in this comic. And I thought that was a really interesting way to do it because we got a little bit of, Orion Apocrypha here, plus, the story that's happening right in front of us. And they melded pretty well together, and kind of wondering, is Lore going to help them or is he going to be against them? What's happening? We end on a pretty significant cliffhanger here with Lore in charge of the Defiant, and Worf's been shot. Pretty sure they're not going to kill Worf, but, these comics, you just never know. And, as Jonathan Frakes always says, is anybody ever really dead in Star Trek? So not too worried about that, but, there's just kind of a nice, it was a little bit of story building on this, but also just kind of a nice, almost one-shot adventure with this, with Ro and B'Elanna and Worf kind of escaping or being saved by Spock. So it was, I'm excited to get to the next one, as usual, at the end of this one.
I think with this issue, it almost felt a little too much like filler to me. I mean, there's some interesting things, like you said. Lore gets a body, and he is put in charge of the Defiant as Spock is trying to work things out in engineering. And so where that's going to go is going to be fascinating to see. And we pick up an Orion here, so that would be a cool story to follow up on as well. But the rest of the issue, too, I just felt like it almost like we're just trying to fill up page space before we get to the big crossover, instead of having really, truly anything very interesting happening. I think there's a few interesting moments, but on a whole, this one was probably the weakest so far of the Defiant series. And so I hope that, as we move into the next issues, it picks up. And I think it will. I think, 4 is really going to be continuing our Day of Blood build up. And so, this one just left me a little bit, a dish best served cold, like revenge. So, and then lastly, we do have a Star Trek 8. and Sisko is on trial, and the Theseus is searching for the orb in a area of space that is known as the Grave of the Prophets. How did you feel about this one, especially since we really do start to get the trial here of Benjamin Sisko?
I thought the trial was nicely broken up with kind of the B story, or I'm not really sure which one was the B story, I guess, since the main mission is really to get the orb. The trial itself was fine. Of course, we get Garak showing up to defend Sisko, which naturally, I guess, was a bit weird, but it still, was fine, but with the Theseus crew, it wasn't a huge part of that story, but it was still fun seeing them come together with Data in charge of the ship. He's captain of the ship. He's kind of still struggling, I guess, with command, just like we saw during the run of Next Generation. But then we also get to have a little bit of a callback to Deep Space Nine with the solar sail ship that Sisko and Jake built, and they do something like that similar for the Theseus, which was kind of a fun little callback, kind of a strange one, but this is the comics. They're supposed to get kind of strange. So I'm glad so we're almost to the end of the trial, so we'll see how that goes as we move forward. And then, once again, just yet another cliffhanger. They just cliffhang right into each other. And, the Theseus crew is, come up against another little roadblock that they've got to get past once they find out where the orb is. So it was kind of another one that was fillery to me. It just didn't take us where I thought we'd go after the last one, especially with the trial here in this one. So again, we'll see where we go after this as we lead into the Day of Blood, but meh.
It's interesting that you responded to this one like that. I thought that bringing in the Jem'Hadar as the only witness and his testimony of the way in which, Sisko and his crew had been a part of all Jem'Hadar realizing that there's something out there that could be different for them was really pretty fascinating to me. And so I really liked that. And then, the other side with the Theseus was fun, I thought. And it was most interesting, of course, with the issue ending with them running into the Red Path already on this station looking for the same thing. And so can't wait to see. In some ways, I somewhat understand how you feel, because it's like, oh, now I want to get to that. And so I am kind of on the edge of my seat to see what's going to happen, I guess, in both of these stories, because this sets up what's coming, so this really is almost like a middle issue. And so it's really incumbent for that next issue to really fill this out, I think, well. So, and I think that will happen because this series so far has done that. But yeah, I mean, all of these comics coming out, I'm just so excited for. And we have a ton coming out soon. May wraps up with the annual. June, we're going to have Defiant and Star Trek coming out. July, we have Defiant, Star Trek. We've got Day of Blood coming out. August, we've got Defiant and Star Trek. We're going to have a Strange New Worlds comic coming out. The Scorpius Run series starting. And then September, we've got Defiant, Star Trek, and more Scorpius Run. So it's like we are, I mean, in all honesty, the next Star Trek book, and the only new one we have coming out, is the latest Discovery book that we're going to talk to Dayton Ward about. And that's the last new Star Trek book that's coming out, at least fiction-wise. We've got a ton of nonfiction coming out soon, and we have no idea what's happening on that front. when it comes to fiction.
Yeah.
So comics are really going to be the things that are going to be the new stuff coming out. But I don't know. Casey, why don't we go, stand in the shadow of heaven and finish up our Voyager series? What do you think?
Let's do it.
Well, Casey, Christine Golden's trilogy, Dark Matters, comes to an end in the book Shadow of Heaven. And again, we kind of broke this up into discussions about characters and their parts of the story. And Paris and Chakotay's part of the story has a lot to do with the wrap-up of the story. And I'm really interested to hear what you think about, because Paris ends up with the Kololan still, and Chakotay is with the Alalan, and then they end up kind of finding a way to meet in the middle in the end. And how did you feel about the wrap-up specifically with these two characters and this part of this story in this final book?
I feel like there was almost no other way based on the way that they had set this up, especially by the end of the last book with Chakotay basically being rescued by the Alilan, that they were essentially going to have to work together by the end of it, which is exactly what happens. And, we've still got our kind of segregated ideas, but now we've got some people who've seen both sides and want to create a third way of living their lives and try to homogenize some of their beliefs and everything. And I don't know, it was almost predictable just because of how everything had been set up before. And I don't know, there was some action in these scenes and, some fights and everything. And, things got pretty gruesome at times, actually, in some of the fights that they've had. But I don't know. I'm not really sure what we're supposed to get out of this story. Yeah. If Star Trek is supposed to have a message, why can't we all just get along? Seems to be the message of this one, right, which seems pretty elementary for Star Trek.
I could not agree with you more. I mean, I felt like this whole story felt very forced. The idea that these groups hate each other for none other than the reason that they hate each other, it seems like. And, we kind of learned that these two groups started as a response because of an alien attack. And so one group formed to make sure that it would never happen by remaining primitive and more spiritual, and the other group by embracing technology, and that's where the big split comes. And yet, I this whole story didn't make sense with the other story that's happening. Like, there's no real tie-in for this civilization and the thematic elements in the same way. I didn't feel like it didn't really seem to flow, and it almost felt like this was only created for page space. Like, we needed a bunch of pages to be filled up with this story for Paris and Chakotay. And the biggest issue here is because it didn't have any relevance really with the dark matter. If dark matter had been on this planet and had actually been a part of these two groups hating one another and continuing that hatred, and actually been a part of the reason that group specifically had split off on the Alalan and was trying to take out all these Kololan and their leaders who had been, they have these silent ones who are babies that have been saved by the Alalan, and many of them are sent back to be what is known as like the Koli. And there are kind of leaders in these different settlements that alert the Alalan when the babies are being left for the crafters. And yet, again, there just wasn't that connection that I wanted or needed, a reason for the story to have existed in the first place as a part of this larger story. Because, it just feels like we spend a lot of time here, and it does feel very basic, and there's not as much depth as I would want here. If we're gonna have this story, I feel like there needs to be even more depth to it. And it was frustrating too, because like Chakotay is rescued by the All-Alon, and then he's talking about how much he loves the technology and being back with the technology. And it's like, I don't think you understand Chakotay at all.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there was also that aspect to it that really, I think, just kind of left me frustrated in the writing because it didn't seem to actually fit with the character Chakotay as we know him.
Well, I almost feel like it was even more forced when it was like the author realized, oh no, I've got Chakotay and Paris on this planet. I should mention the dark matter as a reason for maybe why some of these All-Alon are attacking the Kul-Alon. And Chakotay mentions that to their leaders, and they're like, oh yeah, that's gotta be it. That's why our people are attacking theirs. And then it turns out it's really not. It's just that these people really, for some reason, do hate each other. And I'm like, I almost wish that the shepherds had turned up and said, oh no, there's a lot of dark matter here, and that's what's been keeping you separate for all this time. And, you know, we're going to kind of take that out, and you guys can kind of feel your way back together and create this third way of living together. But when it turned out that wasn't the case, it's like, oh no, we're just really in this shadow universe, and it has nothing to do with the dark matter at all. And again, the only reason that Chakotay and Paris are there is to help create balance, since Kala went over into our universe. And so, yeah, I agree with you. It just didn't tie together, and it felt like like we almost had two different ideas of stories to tell, and we just kind of put them together and hoped that they worked well, and it just didn't really.
Well, and I don't mind the idea of talking about these two groups finding a third way together. I think, you know, that was, of course, really interesting. But I think that you kind of hit on it, which was, it's so obvious that it doesn't help the story. That they're going to have to find a way to go this direction. And I think that was the frustrating thing, is that the answer is so obvious in the second book that it just doesn't fit well. And so, which leads me to want to ask you about Janeway, who was being litigated, talking about being on trial, and it seemed like that was going to be a bigger part of the story. And I'm wondering how you feel about the resolution of that here for this book.
Well, I bet you can guess how I feel about it. It was another place that it didn't make sense. I mean, the way she gets out of it was that I can't remember the name of the captain, but he basically, you know, the one that essentially turned himself and her into the government,
right,
to be put on trial. He's like, oh, I've seen the error of my ways, and so I'm going to, you know, fight everyone off while you escape, Janeway. And she does, and that's the last we ever hear of it. And maybe that's why I was feeling so uncertain, because I read this before I read the comics. And so when I was like, a trial of Benjamin Sisko, are we just going to go in and something's going to get him out of it, and then we're, you know, back to status quo again? You know, because this one especially, it just was totally unnecessary, felt like filler. We needed a word count. We had to fit this into 3 books instead of 2 or 1. And, you know, they just threw this in. It was supposed to be a cliffhanger at the end of the last book, and let's just clean it up at the beginning of this one and move on. And it just, you know, by the time I got part of the way, like halfway through the book, I'd totally forgotten about this part already.
100%. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. And it's so sad that this becomes so frustrating. And it doesn't really seem to matter, right? It again, I think you've 100% nailed it in the sense that it does just feel like a place where we're trying to fill a word count. On the other side, one of the stories that we continually have been following here and found most interesting was the story of Jekri, who is at this point in the story, the former head of the Tal Shiar. And I thought, again, that this is the best part of the series. Her escape with Varric, who has been her lover and seemingly betrayed her last time, their escape to the Delta Quadrant and helping Voyager complete their mission and everything, to me was, the most interesting part of the book.
Yeah, absolutely. Her story was the one I felt like it wouldn't necessarily have any impact on our Voyager crew or whatever, but I just feel like the lead up to all this. I remember all the way back in the first book when Jekri and Varric had to meet together like in her quarters and have sex just to keep what is his name, Liao, to out of their brains while they concocted some plan of getting him out of the way. And by the end of this one, I felt like both of their journeys, especially Varric, who we, were led to believe maybe he wasn't actually in love with her. Turns out he actually is, and he's like faithful to her till the end of her days, basically. And just seeing like a really kind of full story arc for her and some of the people around her all the way through the 3 books. It was really cool to see. And, the torture and everything that she has to go through, especially in this book, was really, if we were watching this on TV, it'd be kind of one of those like, the
Game of Thrones episodes
eyeball moments. What's that?
It'd be like a Game of Thrones episode.
Yeah, I mean, just like bloody and gory and everything, and by the and just her resolve as she's sitting in the prison, almost literally rotting away, and kind of as you're reading it, wondering where this is going, and for her by the end to come out on top and still Romulan to the core, but all the better for everything, I guess, that happened. I thought, overall, her story was, they should have just called this the Jekri trilogy and continued with that through the whole time.
Yeah, I mean, I could not agree with you more on that. And it's one of those things where, of course, when you're writing these type of books, it can be hard to find a way to really impact the main characters of the stories, from our Star Trek crews. But yeah, this was fantastic. I felt like they did such a good job with her character and the way in which then she helps, facilitate that by arriving in the Delta Quadrant. And then, of course, we get the return of Talalan to help stop Liu. And the best part about this too is she, really kind of helps facilitate the understanding of what it is that he's been after this whole time and what the Shepherds have been doing, which apparently, the Shepherds have been helping balance our universe so that it doesn't go one way or the other, both leading to our destruction, but keeping the balance so that it continually slowly expands forever. And in doing that, Liu wanted to return the universes to their original chaotic state, which would mean, they'll either burn out or freeze out, either one. And, they're in their own little pocket universe that's so different that it won't ever matter whether or not that happens to another universe. And so I thought, finally getting that was really interesting to know. And then by the end, we get the Shepherds who are going to stop messing with everything altogether. So, I mean, I guess he wins? which you put on our outline, which I was like, yeah, you're right. He kind of wins.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was wondering. I was like, as I thought more about it, as you're talking there, even I'm just thinking, yeah, like I feel like who was in the right with the shepherds, and that's kind of an interesting moral dilemma, or just existential kind of dilemma, really, for our people. But if the shepherds were trying to maintain the balance through artificial means, essentially, or just through their own interventions, and then Leo is saying, no, that's not our place to do that. And he's thinking kind of almost from a God mindset of like, I'm bigger than these people. I'll get them to, like, I've made an oath that I can't do it, but I'm just going to destroy all these people. And it doesn't affect me at all, but we just need to get back to the chaotic state. And it's, like everybody else between the Romulans and between working with Voyager and Janeway and everybody, that T. Allen is essentially like, yeah, okay, we'll stop doing it. And it's like, so now we're not destroying it purposefully with bringing all the dark matter into one universe or another, but it's just going to go back to its chaotic state, which again is what Leo wanted in the first place. So I'm like, I'm not really sure who wins in that and how many millennia or whatever's longer than a millennia this is going to take anyway. But some of the explanation by the end, when you think about it too much, kind of undoes the whole point of a lot of this entire trilogy.
It's a great point. So Harry's bad luck continues when he finds out that his new girlfriend not only doesn't like the things that he likes and hates them, but is literally disappearing from our universe. And so, it's going to be one night. And that's it. Cruel. And he's still an ensign, by the way. Really he's still an ensign. So
yes, ensign never finds love. Yeah, this is just it was a really sweet part of the story with him and her. I mean, they fall in love like very quickly, especially once they kind of come to an understanding about each other, and she realizes that maybe she does actually like some of the things that he does. It was just so kind of anathema to what she had grown up with and come to know as what's right and wrong. But, to get through it and find out they could never have been together because they've come from different universes. But then, like, the cruelty of all cruelties, and we don't even get to see them say goodbye. She has to leave him a recording. I mean, I was just like, ugh. That sucks, and I mean, you feel bad for Harry in that situation.
I mean, it's the story of Harry's life, of looking for love in all the wrong places, looking for love. Yeah, it's terrible. I mean, the less said about this story, the better. We did finally figure out, Casey, who our interluding character is. And it is apparently Kes, but from another universe where she was allowed by her crew just to transcend her nature. And instead of becoming a ball of fury, she became this evolved entity. And, so it was interesting that became the case. And I wish that it just felt like it had more to do with the rest of the story, because I think it's actually the kernel of a great idea. Really is. I think that this was a really smart idea to have this be the case, but then it is kind of meaningless again for the rest of the story because she doesn't have any interactions with our crew or anything, and she's from another universe, and so it's another place where good kernel of an idea that in execution actually doesn't really mean much for the story.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the savvy reader will have probably realized from pretty early on that this was Kes, just because there was a lot of Easter eggs thrown out in these parts of the stories. And I was so... the revelation that she was from a different universe or she was a different Kes from ours was like that. That was a surprise to me, and I appreciated it just because of how our Kes ended up, as you said, in a ball of fury. And man, yeah, I really wish that she had gotten to interact with them more than just Tuvok realizing that she was there. She just kind of floats, like literally floats around the outskirts of everyone's awareness and then moves on. And part of me wonders if, depending on when these were written, which I can't recall off the top of my head, but if maybe the author was hoping to do something more with that later or something. But yeah, I completely agree with you. This was a great little kernel of an idea, and it just, I want more of this now, and it's, I know we'll never get it, and that kind of sucks. And, because otherwise at this point, it's just more filler and kind of was unnecessary.
Yeah.
A little bit of a Deus Ex Machina here.
Yeah, I mean, part of it was that, and we talked about this idea, is that you did need something else to be involved with picking up this dark matter and the universe, because, there's only so much Voyager can do, and even in the quadrant they're in. And so, no, I 100% agree with you on that. It does feel like, it's just hitting the easy button, the Kes easy button. But Casey, so we are wrapping up this series, and this is the last book. What did you end up thinking of this book, and what are you going to rate it?
Well, I don't think it comes as much surprise that this isn't going to get a very high rating. But, overall, I think that the book itself is a 2.5. I will say that it was my favorite of all three of them. And which I don't feel like is saying much. I think I gave, 2.5 to 3 stars to all of the books. But yeah, this was definitely... So I think on Goodreads, I actually gave all three of them 3 stars, but they're all really about 2.5. And I think even the second one probably was closer to a 2, even if I think about it in context with the rest of them. But, it's one, there was, a lot of good ideas throughout the book that just never gelled or never really went the direction that they could have gone to really make a more compelling story for me. So yeah, I'd say it's 2.5 on the high end for the whole series too.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I would give this a 2.5 as well. Unfortunately, this is just not a very good series overall. And this book, while slightly better than others, I think the problem with it is that it doesn't really do anything. And I think the biggest problem is that this book should have just been a duology, and you could have cut out a lot of stuff and reworked some story ideas, and I think it could have been much better. I think the whole thing, though, this whole book series just really feels like filler, and the only thing that I've really enjoyed here is the story about the Romulan Jekri. And you should not have that when you're reading a Star Trek Voyager novel series. There should be something to gravitate towards with the other characters. But the other big issue here is that the characters never sound like themselves. And so it doesn't even feel like you're reading Voyager, other than the fact that their names are here. And I guess Harry feels somewhat similar, but it's just because we're doing the same sad sack Harry story. And so, in all honesty, this is a series that anybody should just avoid reading. It really is not worth your time. So we have helped you in that sense. When you're looking for Star Trek books, I would not recommend this series whatsoever. It's just not worth checking out, unfortunately, which is sad to say. But, it's part of what happens when you have the hundreds of Star Trek books that we do. Not everyone is going to be a winner, and that's okay.
Well, as I continue my read through of the 24th century Star Trek books, which I know I was on here for a few of the last few episodes of those ones, and working my way through catching up all the ones that I've missed. I'm in the fall right now. I think I've read through the second book of the fall, which is, if you're going to avoid the series that we just completed here, go read the fall if you've never read that one. That one so far is excellent.
Absolutely. No, those are some great books. I mean, you're bringing me back to talking about those with all the authors, too. It was so much fun. So, no, I couldn't recommend a series more. I'm so excited, though. We've got some good stuff coming up. We've got the new Discovery book coming up with Dayton. We can't wait to talk about that with him. And then we've got some other great choices coming up for you here throughout the summer. And as we hit the fall, like we mentioned, we've got a lot of great nonfiction books that are going to be coming out. The making of Picard, the making of Star Trek II. We've got Patrick Stewart's new autobiography, as well as the autobiography of Benjamin Sisko that's coming out. And so that's fiction, but, kind of nonfiction, whatever. Yeah.
It's nonfiction to those of us who love him.
So there is a lot of great stuff that's going to be coming for you here on Literary Treks. But Casey, where should people catch up with you if they'd like to see what else you have going on these days?
Yeah, I'm actually, surprisingly enough, most active on Goodreads and Letterboxd, and I'm at Knitting Trekkie. You should definitely check out the Literary Treks group on Goodreads, and, the discussions have been quiet lately, but, every now and then we get in there and have a little discussions with each other and find out what everybody's reading. So that's a lot of fun. You can also find me on Facebook in the Babel Conference, another great place to chat with everybody and, talk about the shows. And, Matt's always really great about going and posting on older posts, like older podcast posts about like new trailers that have come out on, when things they're going to discuss on 602 Club or, wherever. So, Babel Conference is actually a pretty cool place to hang out for people.
Absolutely.
I know people can find you like everywhere. Where's that at?
I am most active on Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd, and Vero. So those are the places you can find me the most. Of course, here on the network, you mentioned we got the 602 Club where we're talking about all of those fandoms outside of Star Trek that we love, and we're having a blast there. So many great movies coming out this summer we're going to be talking about. In fact, as of next week, I'm so excited that we've got Zachary Fruling, who's going to be joining us again on TFM in the 602 Club. He's going to be helping us out there, and we're going to be talking about Tron, the original, before we hit a bunch of new movies for the summer coming out. So check that out. You can also find me doing The Orb about Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Warp 5 about Star Trek Enterprise. Saddle Up is coming back right around the corner with new Strange New Worlds talk, and The Artificial Tango about Star Trek Picard. Over on the Nerd Party Network, you'll find me with a couple of shows as well. One is about Harry Potter. We talked about every single chapter of the Harry Potter series, one chapter at a time. That's Owlpost. And then you'll find me doing Aggressive Negotiations, a Star Wars podcast with John Mills. But thank you so much for joining us. And until next time, live long
and read on.
What do you call that, light reading? To each his own, number one.